Hi there, welcome back to St. Thomas Aquinas for Everyone. I'm Dave Palmer, and thanks for watching this video. I have a different angle here because just showing a little bit more of the studio that I set up here with the new mic, and of course the Michelangelo picture behind me, which ties in, as I explained in the last video, really nicely with the Summa and what it is all about. And so this video is what I would call some very interesting and peculiar questions that have to do with the passion, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. I think you're going to enjoy these. There are about 6 or 7 different articles I'm going to discuss. This may be a little bit longer than some of the videos, but I do invite you to hang with me and watch this because you're going to be learning from the angelic doctor about really the most important events in the history of the world, which is, of course, the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, because there's really nothing more important than that has ever happened in the whole world. And so let's get right to it. And again, these are just kind of not unrelated because they all have to do with that basic, these series of events, but I think you'll find them to be very interesting. And so here we are in Tertia Pars, third part of the Summa, question 50, article 4. He says, whether Christ was a man during the 3 days of his death. Have you ever thought about that? When Jesus' soul had left his body, as is the case always with death, and then you also have the Godhead that's factored in there. What exactly was the body? What was Jesus? What was going on? Thomas says, it is an article of faith that Christ was truly dead. Hence, it is an error against faith to assert anything whereby the truth of Christ's death is destroyed. Now, it belongs to the truth of death of man or animal that by death the subject ceases to be man or animal, because the death of the man or animal results from the separation of the soul, which is the formal complement of the man or animal. Consequently, to say that Christ was a man during these 3 days of his death simply and without qualification is erroneous, yet it can be said that he was a dead man during those 3 days. Isn't that interesting? So because his body and his soul separated, and the body-soul composite is necessary for a person to be a man, he was not a man during those 3 days. So Thomas goes on and says, however, some writers have contended that Christ was a man during those 3 days, uttering words which are indeed erroneous, yet without intent of error in faith. Hugh of St. Victor, who contended that Christ during 3 days that followed his death was a man because he held that the soul is a man, but this is false. Okay, so Thomas is saying it's a very important issue having to do with our faith, that the body and the soul have to be together in order for it to be a human being. Otherwise, you have a corpse and you have a separated soul or a ghost, right? And so he's saying that this was false. Likewise, the master of the sentences, who was Peter Lombard, held Christ to be a man during the 3 days of his death for quite another reason, for he believed the union of soul and flesh not to be essential to a man, and that for anything to be a man, it suffices if it had a soul and a body, whether united or separated, and this is likewise false. And so this is Thomas really disagreeing with a couple of the masters who preceded him, and it's very important in our study of theology to know that the body-soul composite is vital for a person to be a human being. Otherwise, like I said, they're not. All right, did Christ go down into the hell of the lost? And of course, we know that during those 3 days, Christ did go down. But again, was it his soul? Was it his Godhead? Was it his body? What is going on? A thing is said to be in a place in 2 ways. First of all, through its effect. And in this way, Christ descended into each of the hells, but in different manner. For going down into the hell of the lost, he wrought this effect, that by descending thither, he put them to shame for their unbelief and wickedness. But to them who were detained in purgatory, he gave hope of attaining to glory, while upon the holy fathers detained in hell solely on account of original sin, he shed the light of glory everlasting. Now, this is what is described in the Old Testament as Sheol. So you really have three different things going on here. You have the purgatory, you have the Sheol. Some people combine those to be like the same thing. And then you have the hell of the lost, which is the irredeemable, irrevocably lost people who are in hell. In another way, a thing is said to be in a place through its essence. And this way, Christ's soul descended only into that part of hell where the just were detained, so that he visited them in place, according to his soul, whom he visited interiorly by grace, according to his Godhead. Accordingly, while remaining in one part of hell, he wrought this effect in a measure in every part of hell, just as while suffering in one part of the earth, he delivered the whole world of his passion. So, interesting connection that Thomas is making here. So, in his essence, he only visited the hell of those who were redeemable and not the hell of the lost. Okay, so does this matter? Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting, I think. Okay, whether Christ was the cause of his own resurrection. Now we know that Elijah went up on the chariot of fire into heaven. We know that Our Lady was assumed into heaven. And then we also know that Christ rose into heaven. So the question here is, by what power did these individuals, in two cases, creatures like Elijah and Mary, ascend into, going to heaven? Thomas says, in consequence of death, Christ's Godhead was not separated from his soul, nor from his flesh. Now, this is interesting. The Godhead never separated from his flesh. Okay? Consequently, both the soul and the flesh of the dead Christ can be considered in two respects. First, in respect of his Godhead. Secondly, in respect of his created nature. Therefore, according to the virtue of the Godhead united to it, the body took back again the soul which it had laid aside, and the soul took back again the body which it had abandoned. And thus Christ rose by his own power. And thus, this is precisely what is written in 2 Corinthians, for although he was crucified through our weakness, yet he liveth by the power of God. Okay? But if we consider the body and soul of the dead Christ according to the power of created nature, they could not thus be reunited, but it was necessary for Christ to be raised up by God. So the Godhead never departed from the body, and that was able to call back the soul. It's kind of complicated when you think about it. Why does this matter? It matters because we are a body-soul composite, and we, through faith, believe that at the end of time, our bodies will rise again from the dead, not by our own power. So he's making a distinction here between what God can do and what we can do. Mary, remember, didn't ascend into heaven. She was assumed. She did not have the power to do it on her own. Okay, so whether Christ's body should have been risen with its scars. Okay, so when Christ is in heaven bodily right now, does he still have his scars? Think about Padre Pio. Does he still have the stigmata in heaven? Even in an earthly sense, we see people like Dan Crenshaw, who's a politician. He lost his eye in war, right? I think he was like a Navy SEAL. And so this patch is a badge of honor. And that's what Thomas is going to get at here. It was fitting for Christ's soul at his resurrection to resume the body with its scars. In the first place, for Christ's own glory, for Bede says that he kept his scars not from inability to heal them, but to wear them as an everlasting trophy of his victory. Hence, Augustine says, perhaps in that kingdom we shall see on the bodies of the martyrs the traces of the wounds which they bore for Christ's name, because it will not be a deformity but a dignity in them, and a certain kind of beauty will shine in them. In the body, though not of in the body, though not of the body. Secondly, to confirm the hearts of the disciples as to the faith in his resurrection. Thirdly, that when he pleads for us with the Father, he may always show the manner of death he endured for us. Okay? All right, so a couple more articles here. Whether Christ should have appeared to the disciples in another shape. So when he had risen from the dead, before he ascended, he appeared in different forms, right? So Thomas is saying, was that appropriate? Why did he do that? Okay, so here he is appearing to his disciples, his apostles. And remember on the road to Emmaus, when you had the two men who were confused by Jesus and they didn't recognize him. Why did they not recognize him? What was different? They knew what Jesus looked like, right? So he says Christ's resurrection was to be manifested to men in the same way as divine things are revealed. But divine things are revealed to men in various ways, according as they are variously disposed. For those who have minds well disposed perceive divine things, things rightly, whereas those not so disposed perceive them with a certain confusion of doubt or error. For the sensual man perceiveth not those things that are of the Spirit of God. Consequently, after his resurrection, Christ appeared in his own shape to some who were well disposed to believe, while he appeared to another shape for them who seemed to be already growing tepid in their faith. Hence these said, we hoped that we hoped that it was he that should have redeemed Israel. That's talking about the two men on the road to Emmaus. They didn't recognize him because their faith was growing tepid. Okay. All right, last one we're going to do here, whether after the judgment that takes place in the present time, there remains yet another judgment. This is really interesting. I never realized this to be the case. I don't know if this is an official church teaching or not, but listen to what Thomas says here. He says, okay, so again, at the end of time, we're going to be judged. It looks like an angel judging man, which is kind of interesting. And there's a picture of the general judgment, the general, resurrection, right? Some artistic rendering of it. Judgment cannot be passed perfectly upon any changeable subject before its consummation, just as judgment cannot be given perfectly regarding the quality of any action before its completion in itself and of its results, because many actions appear to be profitable, which in their effects prove to be hurtful, and in the same way perfect judgment cannot be passed upon any man before the close of his life, since he can be changed in many respects from good to evil, or conversely, or from good to better, or from evil to worse. Hence the apostle says, it is appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment. Okay, so we cannot be judged until every aspect of our life has been taken into account. But look where Thomas takes this. He says it must be observed that although man's temporal life in itself ends with death, still it continues dependent in a measure on what comes after it in the future, in one way, as it still lives on in men's memories, in which sometimes, contrary to the truth, good or evil reputation lingers on. In another way, in man's children, who are so to speak something of their parents according to Scripture, his father is dead, and he is as if he were not dead, for he hath left one behind him that is like himself. So Thomas is saying here that even after we die, our legacy is going to play into our judgment. Isn't that interesting? And then he's going to say this. Thirdly, as to the result of his actions, just as from the deceit of Arius and other false leaders, unbelief continues to flourish down to the close of the world, and even until then, faith will continue to derive its progress from the preaching of the apostles. Now all these things are submitted to the verdict of the divine judgment, and consequently a perfect and public judgment cannot be made of all these things during the course of this present time. Wherefore there must be a final judgment at the last day, in which everything concerning every man in every respect shall be perfectly and publicly judged. Isn't that interesting? All right, so he's saying that we don't get judged when we die. He actually says we're going to be looking at the legacy, the way our children turn out, speak of us, the teachings that we do. So this teaching that I'm doing right now, this, for good or for bad, hopefully for good, could impact my final judgment. Okay? Doesn't that give you a different perspective on things? All right, that's it for this video. I know it's kind of long. I hope you're still watching. Please comment. Let's get a conversation going. And we are really getting close to the end of the Summa now. We're going to get into the sacraments and then the last things, which is going to be death, judgment, heaven and hell, our personal resurrection, the qualities of the body and the soul in heaven. Really interesting at the end of the Summa. So that's it. Thank you for watching. God bless you.